So we're going to talk about mixed economies. The title of this chapter in your book is Modern Economies. You see both of them, but I tend to use the term mixed economies more because I think it's more descriptive of what we're looking at when we look at modern economies. Is there a mix of different ideologies? So the first thing we talk about is laissez-faire capitalism. Laissez-faire is a French expression that means leave it alone. It's the idea that government should totally stay out of the marketplace. Government should have no role in the economy. But of course, none of us actually want that to happen. There are things that we like that the government does. And so we'll talk about some of those things. Let's say that you go off for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks away, you come home and you find that somebody else is living in your family's home and they're claiming your stuff is your own. Well, one of the things that government does is it protects property rights. You have documentation that that's your home, and you can prove that. The government also enforces contracts. If you sign a contract with somebody and they say they're going to do something in exchange for something else, and they don't live up to that contract, you can take them to court, and you can sue them for non-performance of contract. Governments also encourage inventions and innovations through patent laws and provide trademarks and copyrights that allow businesses to carry on and produce goods and services and know that they're going to be able to profit from that. Many of the products that we now can buy very, very cheap, things like Tylenol. There was a time that Tylenol was strictly a prescription drug, and even a time after it was non-prescription when you could only buy the one brand. Well, you go to the store now and you can buy like 50 Tylenol, let's say, for $4, or you can buy 500 of them for $5 at Walmart, the generics. Well, when the patents run out, then other people can make the product. But for 20 years or so, that one company is allowed to produce that product and continue to recover their cost of research and development. Another thing that is a role for government today is making sure that the food and drugs that we get are safe. In 1908, a writer named Upton Sinclair, he was a muckraker, if you remember that from U.S. history. He went to work at the Swift meatpacking plant in Chicago, and he wrote this novel based on his experiences working in the factory. And he described how these meatpacking plants, they basically made use of every single thing. In fact, the old joke was they used everything of the pig except the squeal. The bones, they're ground up and used as fertilizer. I mean, there is nothing that's left to wait. Any little bitty scraps of meat is ground up and turned into sausage, or it's turned into boneless hams. And he would describe how sometimes there would be meat that was loaded on trains that was going to New York or someplace and then shipped to England. And then this meat had spoiled like a couple of months before. And when it got to England, the people in England wouldn't accept it. And so they sent it back to Swift. And they said, some of this meat smells so bad, you couldn't even stand to be in the same room with it. And what the meat packers did was they took the spoiled meat, this horrible smelling meat, and they scrubbed it with borax and used sort of deodorizers, and then they ground it up and mixed it with a bunch of other good meat, and then they sent it out new for people to eat for breakfast. It was really disgusting. Well, it was that kind of journalism that encouraged the government to establish things like the FDA and the USDA. Now you have government inspectors in factories to make sure that there is sanitary conditions to ensure that the products that we buy are going to be safe. There is bacteria that's called E. coli, and it's a common bacteria that's found in the digestive tract of cows. It's nothing that's harmful to cows, but if we ingest it, well, it tends to cause what they call cell necrosis, which basically means that your organs slowly begin to die. And it's incredibly dangerous. Well, they got to make sure when they slaughter the beef that nothing that's in the intestines gets into things like ground beef. If E. coli gets on a steak, it's on the outside of the steak, and then you put that steak on a fiery grill, well, the fire is going to kill it. The big problem with E. coli is when it's on the surface of something, and then that surface gets ground up, and then that hamburger meat doesn't get cooked all the way through. And so that's one of the things that they're looking out for. We wouldn't think today that, it would be a problem with people producing goods that are unsafe to us, but it happens all the time. We want to make sure that the products that we buy, the baby aspirin that we buy, the cold medicine, that is generally safe. And there's, of course, always new prescription drugs that are coming out. And there's a very long process where they go through and they study these drugs, and we look at trials. And even at that, well, if you watch daytime TV, you can see lots of ads for lawyers where they're wanting to sue companies for bad drugs. And so government has a role in the economy. This is a circular flow model, and it's a simplified model of the U.S. economy. On the outside, you have a green circle that shows the movement of money. Here's money on the left side going from households, that's you and me, to business firms. And in exchange for that money going clockwise to firms, we have this blue circle that shows firms are selling finished goods to households. So let's think about a simple transaction. You go to a store and you buy yourself a new radio. Your money goes to the firm. The product that they produce, the radio, goes to you. On the other side of the circle, though, we have flows going the opposite direction. From households, we have resources going to firms. So land, labor, and capital. Most of us only sell labor over the course of our lives. But land, labor, and capital are supplied by households to firms. And in exchange, firms send money to households, which of course we take. And the process goes round and round. But there's also the government in the middle of this. We see that the government spends money both with individuals and with business firms. These desks that you're riding on right now, that was a government expenditure. The business provides something, but then again, the business is also a source of revenue to the government. Both households and businesses pay taxes into the system. And then also we would say that, governments provide certain goods and services themselves. Like, for example, the government sometimes will sell land to private developers, or they will sell mineral rights on government land. And so they're buyers and sellers in the marketplace. Very simplified model. Okay, so we're going to look at mixed economies as a continuum. Sometimes I'll take students out in the hall and I'll say, okay, line up against the wall, shortest person over here, tallest person over here, everybody else show me from shortest to tallest person, get in the line. Well, if you look at any two people, typically anywhere in the line, there's not a big difference between them. But if you look at the shortest person and the tallest person, there's a big difference. That's a continuum. On the far end of the scale, under centrally planned, where the government is actually controlling the economy to a very large degree, we have countries like North Korea, we've seen that, Cuba, Iran. Down on the farther end, though, on the free market side, we have countries like Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia is usually down here. And then we have countries that are sort of close to the free market, like the US and Canada. And then there are countries that are closer to government control, like China and Russia. So this gives you an idea of the spectrum and where they fit. And countries are on the move often. We're going to see something, I think, in a little bit that shows you that China is moving more towards free market and has been, and the United States is moving more towards government control. All right, so what are the advantages of a mixed economy? Well, really what we're talking about here is we're talking about the advantages of a free market economy. Most mixed economies, they have a large measure of individual freedom. And so most products that are produced and sold are based on people's supply and demand. People take clues from prices and they produce the goods and services that people want to buy, and the market operates on its own. It also is a very efficient system because the most efficient producers are the ones that are going to make the highest profit. There's a lot of competition between businesses to try to get the business of consumers, so companies are always fiercely trying to find ways to offer better service, lower prices, and of course, at the same time, increase their profits. For many, many years, there were two stores that went back and forth between number one and number two retailers in the United States. And for many years, it was Sears, and then it would be Kmart, and then back to Sears, and so forth. Well, Kmart was the big discount store. And even as a kid, going into Kmart stores, they seemed very different than what you think of today. But they were seen as a big discount store, and so if you wanted to go buy something at a low price, people went to Kmart. Well, while Kmart was dominant in the retail discount business, there was this guy who was opening some small stores in small towns in Arkansas and Missouri and places like that. And then, Sam Walton starts opening stores, his Walmart stores, in little bigger towns. And eventually he ends up in places like Houston, Texas. And he's opening up quite a few stores. I'm sure that Kmart, at first, when they heard about Walmart, it's like, who is this guy? I mean, what's he going to do? I mean, we're Kmart, right? Well, Sam Walton was really, really strong in efficiency and having really low prices. Even though he's a billionaire, it showed up in his own life as well. He drove an old pickup truck for years when he could have gone out and bought anything or had a chauffeur-driven limousine, but that wasn't his style. So Walmart was cutting prices, and they were still making money even though they could offer really low prices. And Kmart, they started losing customers to Walmart. And so Walmart really forced Kmart to cut their prices. The problem is that when Kmart cut their prices to about what Walmart was charging, they were losing money doing it because Kmart was not as efficient. And in time, they basically closed all their stores in this part of the country, and they kind of pulled back to where they were stronger. And for a while, it looked like Kmart was actually doing pretty good again. But now I understand that they're one of those companies that people are wondering, are they even going to be here in a couple of years? There's always that list of companies that are on that kind of terminal list. Radio Shack is one of them. Best Buy is one of them. Another advantage of a mixed economy is it encourages innovation to meet customer needs more creatively and cheaply or efficiently. There are two companies that have been huge in the video rental business. One of them was Blockbuster.
What's that?
Yeah, what's that? Okay. Well, there was a time when Blockbuster could have bought Netflix for like, I don't know, $20 million or something like that. And Blockbusters would just laughed it off. It's like, why would Blockbuster want to buy this little company? Well, Netflix dug the grave for Blockbuster, all right? And they have been better at providing people what they want and ways that they want to use it. So you can watch movies and TV shows, billions of dollars worth of programming for $8-9 a month, and you can watch it a lot of different ways. And as a result, Netflix is a very, very profitable business. The last thing it talks about is allocating capital. People want to invest with companies that are making money and that they're doing well. And that just tends to attract more and more people to invest in those companies. Mixed economy also tries to minimize some of the disadvantages of a market economy. There are times that we can't wait for private businesses or people to do things. There are times that the government just has to step out. And times like times of war or disaster relief, the government is able to mobilize a lot of money, a lot of resources, and devote it to a task pretty intensely without waiting for the market to take its clues. That's a very good thing. Nobody goes out and provides their own national defense. Nobody's going to go out and, develop a space program like NASA did in the 1950s. We do see that there is a private space market that they're trying to get going, but, that's a long way off. But that's the role of government. Nobody's going to probably go out and build their own fire station to protect their house, but it's a need, and government will provide that need through tax money. And then it talks about how it tries to look out for businesses that might be at some kind of competitive disadvantage. There are programs out there where the government will set aside a certain amount of its purchases to buy from women-owned business or minority-owned businesses or small businesses as opposed to large businesses. And they're just trying to make sure that the balance of competition is really fair. But there are some disadvantages of mixed economy. If it's too much of a free market economy, then some people win, other people lose. And the losers, if they don't have enough government support, then they can really struggle. Next week, we're going to be looking at, or maybe later this week, we're going to be looking at programs that the government offers for people that are struggling. There are also times that the government tries to do too much. The government is as often trying to create new programs to help people. And as a result, they're spending a lot of money often that they don't have. And that means borrowing more money that has to be paid back. And borrowing money that has to be paid back in the future is going to hurt us in the long run. We're going to see this in just a little bit. All right, the government is there to, it should be the referee. It should be there to help and make sure that everybody's treated fairly. But you all know that sometimes businesses, they'll go to Congress and they will lobby for tax breaks, or they'll lobby for restrictions that don't apply to them, but will apply to people that want to compete with them. And so sometimes the government, instead of taking the side of the consumer, they protect one company over another, or they protect companies over individuals. And of course, there are times, like we saw, what was that, 6-7 years ago, when we had banks that were failing and we had General Motors that was in danger of going bankrupt and out of business, that the government stepped in and bailed these things out. They put up money and guaranteed these banks and businesses because they were thought to be too big to fail. And of course, if those things don't go well, then